We're going to look now at Romans chapter 9. So get out your Bible and turn over to Romans, the 9th chapter. The 9th chapter of Romans is probably one of the most, I would say, almost hated, feared, and neglected chapters in the Bible by those who don't like this doctrine of unconditional election and predestination. In fact, I've known many Bible teachers, in fact friends of mine in the ministry, that will teach up through Romans chapter 8 and actually skip Romans 9 and then pick it up at Romans 10 or Romans 12. Many of the books written on this subject, and I'm not even going to mention the names of the books that are designed to refute this doctrine. I don't want to mention the names of them. I don't want you out wasting your money on them. They skip Romans 9. They just don't even talk about Romans 9. And here's why. Because Romans 9 speaks of individuals, not nations. It's very clear as we get in here. If you're in Romans 9, if you just take a look down in verse 10 and following, it's talking about Jacob and Esau. Not only this, but there was Rebekah also, when she had conceived twins by one man, our father Isaac. For though the twins were not yet born and had not done anything good or bad, in order that God's purpose according to his choice might stand, not because of works, but because of him who calls, it was said to her, the older will serve the younger, and just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. What shall we say then? There is no injustice with God, is there? For he says, may it never be. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. So then it does not depend on the man who wills, or the man who runs, but on God who has mercy. Then it goes on to give the example of Pharaoh, whose heart was hardened. And the point of this passage is that Pharaoh didn't harden his own heart first. God hardened his heart. And that God can harden people's hearts if he wants to. He can have mercy on whoever he wants to have mercy on, and it doesn't depend on what they've done, good or bad. It's just based on his sovereign will and his sovereign purpose. Romans chapter 9 speaks of individuals, not nations. I mean, look at this. It does not depend on the man, singular, who wills, or the man who runs, but on God who has mercy. It's not talking about nations. It's talking about individuals. Jacob was an individual. Esau was an individual. Speaks of individuals, not nations. Speaks of unconditional election. It's not based on any foreseen faith or merit on the part of the individual. Also teaches the doctrine of reprobation, that there are some vessels that God chooses for honor and others for destruction. People say, oh, you believe in double election. Well, you're going to, I'm sorry. Read Romans 9. Don't ignore it. It's right there. But most importantly, Romans 9 deals with the two most common objections that are given to this doctrine of election and predestination. First of all, in verse 14, what shall we say then? There is no injustice with God, is there? May it never be. So people say it's not fair. God's not just. If man doesn't have a free will, God's not fair. That to be fair, what God has to do is have a level playing field and everybody has an equal chance. And that everybody has to have the ability to choose of their own free will. And if that's not, then God's unfair. So now Paul anticipates this objection. That, see, it's right here. What shall we say, verse 14? There is no injustice with God, is there? In other words, God's not just. Look what it says. May it never be, for he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy. I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. So you know what the answer to the objection is, that God's not fair? Is that God can do whatever he wants. He's God. He can do whatever he pleases. So that's the answer to that. Is God unfair? No. Fair schmear. God can do whatever he wants to do. He's God. We're fallen, sinful humans. He can choose nobody if he wants to. He could have chosen everybody if he'd have wanted to, and I don't know why he didn't. It was for his own reason. The fact that he has chosen to save some and not all is up to him. Now take a look down a little farther, verse 19. What you will say to me then, why does he find fault? For who resists his will? And so here, this is the whole idea of human responsibility. How can God hold anybody responsible if they don't have a free will? How does he hold them responsible? God, you have no right to punish people for their sin. You have no right to judge people for not believing in Jesus Christ if they don't have any ability to believe. And if the only way they can believe is if you choose them, and if you choose some and you don't choose all, not only are you unfair, but you have no right to hold people responsible. So to the first objection, he can have mercy on whoever he wants to. You need no business to call him into question. He's God. The second answer is this. On the contrary, who are you, O man, who answers back to God? The thing molded will not say to the molder, why did you make me this way? So now, just listen to this little line of reasoning I'm going to give you, just for a second. Do you notice that Paul is answering two objections that you might have already had? Paul anticipates that you might say, that you might think, that God is unjust, that he's not fair, and that if God is this sovereign, that he has no right to judge people or hold them responsible. These are two common objections. Now listen, Paul anticipates these two objections. Why does he anticipate them? Because he is teaching what you think he's teaching. He's teaching that God is absolutely sovereign. That unconditional election is the kind of election that he has in view. It's unconditional, it's of individuals, there's reprobation involved. So in other words, what I'm saying is, if you raise those two objections, if those things are just stuck in your craw right now, that God's unfair, that human responsibility is an illusion, guess what? You're reading the passage correctly. Paul anticipates that you're going to bring up those two objections. And the fact that he anticipates them shows that if you bring those two objections up, you're reading him loud and clear, brother. He's saying exactly what you think he's saying. So don't you go nations. Don't you try to say it's not talking about individuals, because those objections that he anticipates prove that he's talking about what you think he's talking about. It's the election and predestination of individuals to salvation. It's not based on any kind of foreseen faith or merit. It's unconditional. The doctrine of reprobation or double election is taught right there. And the answer he gives to those two objections, that God's not fair and that he can't hold people responsible, is very simple. It's not going to be an answer that a lot of people like, but the answer is very simple. God is God. He can do whatever he wants to do. He doesn't need your permission. He doesn't need to satisfy every little whim that you've got, that he be fair, that he be just according to your definition. God is God. And Romans 9 teaches us very clearly that we don't have a leg to stand on when we try to oppose God with our objections that he's not fair and that he has no right to punish or hold people responsible, because he's God. And as God, he can do whatever he wants. And that might be a hard view of God for some, but this is what Romans 9 teaches.